Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. On this episode, we talked to Anitha Vittal, and she has a really cool background in accounting. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a CPA myself, but she went through quality assurance, she went through internal audit, and she's built several compliance and ethics centers of excellence. And I think her mindset is one that we can borrow a lot from, particularly around adaptability, around collaboration, and around continued evolution. When she talks, listen to how she focuses outward on how she can improve the business and how she can really leverage what's coming down the pike from a technology perspective, or how she can rethink how her department works or how the impact that she has on her organization can change. I think as we step into this new era, we need to be doing a lot more of that collaboration and a lot more of that sort of servanthood of keeping that end user in mind, because when we can be that strong circulatory system to the organization, we can drive a culture of integrity forward in a much more meaningful and sustainable way. So I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts. How are you?
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm doing very well. How have you been?
I've been doing very well myself. I'm excited to get you on and to dive in. We had such a great pre-show call. So before we get into all my questions and stuff, I always love to kind of start with, what was it like growing up for you? What kind of a kid were you? What was your family like? Where did you come from? Because those foundations tend to, persist throughout our lives.
Great. Certainly. But before I begin jumping into answering your questions, Nick, I'd just like to call out that all views that I'm sharing today are personal and do not represent my organization. With that, I think I grew up in a small town early on with my grandparents in a small village down south in India. And I think that phase of my growing up actually shaped a lot of what I am today and what I have grown up to be over the last many years. So as a little child, I had this opportunity to go on long walks with my grandfather. And every day, when we went on, we would pick up a sort of a theme, and he would ask questions. I would ask him counter questions. And then we never would realize that how the time would have passed, right? So I guess that's what kept me growing as an individual. And also in that process, I did learn quite a few things from across the different spectrum, from, languages to music to many other things. And thanks to my grandfather, I think that really shaped me a lot to what I am today.
What kind of themes would you talk about? What kind of questions would he ask you? Would he ask you things to kind of get you thinking at a young age about things that maybe you wouldn't be thinking about?
Absolutely. For example, he would start with as simple as, what did you have for food today? Or what did you have for lunch today? And then, he would ask me questions, what were the vegetables that you would have? And do you know, if this certain vegetable was so good, what are the benefits of having that? What are some of the fruits you would have? And it would be across the spectrum, as I said. And I think that sort of created a curiosity in me early on in my life. And that essentially stayed with me all through and even today. So I'm always curious to know more, learn more. And that also sort of shaped my career in a way, is how I would put it, Nick.
You grew up in this village. What set you on this path into ethics and compliance? You've been in this space for 25 years. How what attracted you to this space?
All right. So the part of the world that I come from, typically a student chooses to be either an engineer or a doctor. They pursue engineering or medicine as careers.
There's two paths.
Typically, yeah, just two of them, right? Because that's considered to be the professions back then, about 3 decades ago, when I was at a moment of making a decision. And that's when I had this conversation with my parents, and I said, look, I'm neither interested in engineering nor in medicine. I want to do something different. And my father then introduced me to some of his colleagues, who were working with me. And then as part of some of those conversations, I had this opportunity to meet the head of finance of one of the large public sector undertakings in India back then. And then this gentleman would just asked me, what is it that you like to do, Anitha? And my sort of immediate response was, I love to ask questions, right? And then, he used to kind of talk a lot about what are the kind of questions, and just have this conversation. And then he was the one who actually suggested to me that probably auditing and accounting is a career that I could think of pursuing, because that's where you kind of get to ask a lot of questions. Right. And of course, I did a lot of, research myself. Of course, we didn't have internet as much as it is today back then, but then I used to read some books, go back and sort of ask some of those people who had actually pursued it. And I think that was really a eureka moment in my life, where I made a decision to pursue chartered accountancy, as a profession. And at that point, it was considered to be one of the most challenging programs in India, and we had less than 10% of pass percentage every year.
Wow.
Of course, people then tell me, are you sure you want to do something this, challenging? And I said, absolutely, because I get to ask questions. And I guess that's where I made up this mind, and I went on to become a chartered accountant.
How did you find accounting? Did you like it? Did you like it right off the bat? Was it what kept you in it? Because it's a very challenging field. I came from that field as well. It's a very challenging field. And how did you find that sort of process of learning it? How did you find, did you find it interesting? And what were you kind of focused on? I'm asking that in the context of, whenever I'm going through something hard, if I don't have like a goal at the end, or like a next move, that time always seems so much more difficult. So what were you kind of, talk to me a little bit about going through that process and that education, and what you were kind of latching onto outside of that kept you motivated.
Absolutely. So as part of my chartered accountancy curriculum, Nick, we pursue the academic subjects, which included accounting, taxation, auditing, and so on. But along with that, we also do a 3-year internship, right? Which
Wow.
runs in the sense that you go to work 9 to probably 8 in the evening, then come back home and do your studies, right? That used to be the sort of a schedule for me for almost 3.5 years, as soon as I decided to pursue my chartered accountancy. And as part of this internship, I had the opportunity to really, engage myself, involve myself in multiple audits, and primarily internal audits. And I think I stuck on to it back then. Since then, that I really wanted to pursue auditing as a career. And of course, I was good at accounting. I loved accounting. I still do. But as a career, this kind of asking questions, and then ability to kind of go and interact with some of the leadership team members of the organization, even at a very young age, actually challenged me. And therefore, I think it was pretty set for me, even during my early internship days, that I would want to pursue a career in internal audits, in audits primarily. And I think that's what drove me to becoming an auditor. And that was my first job as well. So I became an internal auditor in a consulting firm. And then, I had the opportunity to really...
How cool to be able to do that. So was it at a consulting firm? Like, was your internship with a consulting firm that was doing audits across the board, or was it at a particular organization?
But yeah, it was a different firm. It was one of the largest firms in South India. And then I had the opportunity to actually, join their internal audit function. And
Awesome.
early, I had this opportunity to really be part of multiple audits in the internal audit space back then.
I mean, how interesting to be able to, while you're learning it, also be in the real world, seeing it happen. I mean, in the States, you do all this accounting work, right? You have to go 150 credit hours before you can even sit for your CPA. And it's all just conceptual, it's all just academic. And then you get into the real world and you start to see what those differences are between the theories in the books and like how it's actually done in real life.
Yes. I think that was a great experience to actually blend both my academic learning with my experiential on-the-job learning. And that actually evolves you as an individual as well, because early on at 17 or 8, as a 17 or an 18-year-old, you start to meet some of the finance leadership folks of large organizations, large banks, etc. And that sort of shapes you really in terms of and prepares you well in a way for a corporate life ahead of that. So I think that was a great opportunity, and that really helped me to kind of anchor myself to the function that I'd love to always do.
So you're doing internal auditing. What was the next step in your career?
Great. So I think, yeah, as I told you, I'm always, looking to learn more. And I had a baby, after 3 years of being in the internal audit function. And you know how it is, right? There's so much of travel across, and that's something I was finding it difficult, having a little baby to manage at home and then traveling across the length and breadth of the country. And that's when I said, let me probably take up something which requires less of a travel. And then at that point in time, this was late 1990s, early 2000 is when the technology boom was happening around the world. And so was it happening in India. And we had multiple global capability centers of multinational corporations being opened up in India and specifically in Hyderabad. So I interviewed for one of the largest technology corporations, and then I managed to find a position in the quality assurance function. And so I think a tectonic shift from being an internal audit firm consulting to a technology firm being part of quality assurance, where my job was really to test the products, the financial suite of products, the GRC suite of products, and then continuously improve them, suggest, improvised versions of them, and so on, right? That was my bread and butter. But interestingly enough, I was always then trying to see how that would actually connect back to my world of risk, compliance, and audit. And then after a few years there, I also had the opportunity to actually implement some of these Oracle Financial Suite of products, the GRC products. And that's where, I chose the GRC domain, and it was a phenomenal experience. All my learnings from risk audit functions, I had the opportunity to actually play with technology to actually implement some of those ERP solutions, embedding some of these controls in there. To me, that was a phenomenal experience, a first-time experience of sorts. But then my itch of going back to my core was always there. So I spent a good 10 years in all of these. And that's when I decided, no, I have to now see how do I really leverage my learnings from the technology industry, from the fintech industry, to really, bring it back to my own profession of audit, risk, and compliance, and how could we really transform, reimagine some of these functions, right? Leveraging technology, innovation, simplification, and transformation. So that's how I kind of moved back to internal audits. And then over the last 15 years, I've been working in global capability centers, transitioning risk, audit, and compliance functions into the centers, offering them as a service to the parent organization.
So tell me the nature of those centers of excellence, because I think that's such a unique an interesting concept when it's done correctly. So what's kind of the theory behind it, and how did you end up interacting and adding value to departments or businesses or whatever?
Yeah. So I guess when I started on this journey, this was early 2000s, as I said, the GCCs in India were primarily focused on technology support, tactical areas, back-end support, and less on risk and compliance functions, right? Because at that point in time, I do believe that there was no compelling business case, for functions such as risk and compliance to actually leverage GCCs. But then early on, I did see the benefits out of that, right? Having been part of technology corporations, how they were leveraging GCCs. I always used to spend time wondering, why aren't organizations leverage the same GCCs for actually, their own audit, risk, and compliance functions?
Sorry, what's GCC?
It's the Global Capability Center.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how my thought process started.
You're thinking they have this great resource. Why are they not utilizing it? That's what you're thinking?
Exactly, right? So when you can use an offshore center for having technology support. Why can't you really, use the same logic and use it for a risk audit or compliance function, right?
Got you. Okay.
And that's when I got the opportunity with a rather smaller organization, a fintech organization, which had its capability center in India. And they were looking for an internal auditor, to manage their India internal audit. And then because it was headquartered in the US and it had its present in multiple countries around the world, I said, probably this is an opportunity. So I gave up my, GRC implementation sort of consulting job in the technology field, and I joined back the internal audit function. And people were then wondering, when technology industry is booming, and then that's where the future is, why would you want to shift to internal audit? But then I said, that's where my calling is. And then 6 months after I joined the internal audit department of this fintech GCC in India is when I got a chance to meet the chief audit executive. He was visiting India, and I said, why don't you think of leveraging India even bigger for just not for India audit, but also for the rest of the world audit? He said, how can we do that? The corporate functions are supposed to be in the headquarters, and we can do it only there. I said, why not? Why can't you, there are a lot of documentation work. For example, this company was heavily into Sarbanes-Oxley assessments. I said, how does it matter where you do the documentation from? Why do you want to do it in the US and pay such heavy costs? Why can't you think of having some people here? I take the ownership of delivering high quality documentation, but why can't you really, leverage that? And that's how I guess that was a sort of a groundbreaking moment for me when the chief audit executive agreed. And we set up a small 4-member team in India back then. This was around 2008, 2010. And then, and guess what? The entire internal audit for that organization was largely being done by one of the external partners. And over the span of a 2 to 3 year time, we actually transitioned more than 60% of the internal audit work to in-house being driven out of India. And we just leveraged them for less than, 40%.
Wow.
I think it was such a sort of a case study, for across the organization that, GCCs are just not for technology support. You can actually go beyond and leverage them, for even functions such as risk and audits and compliance.
So at one point it was at 0%. At the end, it was at 60%. And you said that took kind of 2 to 3 years. What kind of resistance did you face? Like your boss in India, you said the head of audit was like, okay, let's try it. We build a 4-person team, but you also need to persuade people on the other side of the ocean to kind of let up the reins and let go of this function that they were, I think you said they were utilizing an external firm, presumably a lot more expensive. What kind of resistance on the state side did you face, and how did you reframe that in order to start, moving toward that 60%?
Absolutely. I think one of the very common resistance that I face that why would you want to do it from a location which is so far away from where we are? And then, what about privacy risks? What about security concerns? We are transferring data, such secure data back from US to India. And then there are different global regulations versus local requirements. There are no privacy laws as such in India. Back then, we didn't have privacy laws then. And interestingly enough, that's when the entire, the economic crisis of 2008 struck. You remember? It was 2008.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, as a result of which, there were certainly growing expectations from risk, audit, and compliance leaders. But having that said, budgets was shrinking, and essentially, the teams were expected to do more with less. And therefore, it became the prerogative of every chief audit, risk, and compliance executive to start reimagining how they do their work.
Wow.
And therefore, it was no longer an option to sort of leverage, the capability centers, but more of a necessity. Right.
Gotcha. So you're able to take advantage essentially of the disruption caused by the global financial crisis, which,
that's right.
And which ultimately caused everyone to like rethink everything to get some more of that work. Very interesting. So how has this mentality of doing more with less, that kind of was the catalyst for getting some of this work? How have you maintained that as sort of a principle or an axiom as you've continued to interact in this space?
Yeah. So I think there are multiple ways in which you can do it, Nick, but I have always struck to three fundamental aspects, and I call it ACE, right? ACE. It's about adapting. That first A stands for adapting yourself. I think staying ahead of the regulatory requirements. I think in the world of risk compliance, the regulatory landscape is forever evolving, right?
Right.
And you have privacy
And it's
laws.
never going backwards, by the way,
No, it's never going to be, right? And therefore, and then you're not going to be, sort of blessed with a lot of budgets either, right? So you will have to find out ways of using the same budget or sometimes lesser budget to actually manage these changes by yourself. And that's where you need to embrace, technology, so adapting yourself as a professional is very key. It's very key to sort of find effective ways to accomplish what we are, entrusted with. Secondly, the C that I talked about, collaboration, right? I mean, as risk and audit professionals, it's very, very important for us to actually collaborate with multiple other functions, and stakeholders such as information technology, HR, legal, finance. And I'll tell you why. These functions sit on a gold mine of data, right? And therefore, it's important for functions like risk and compliance to actually collaborate with these functions, look
Exactly.
at, leverage that data, and see, how you can use that data to actually predict some of the events, which eventually is going to help your organization in preventing it rather than, telling them, oh, you know what, I had already told you this could put you in trouble, right? So, and the third mantra that I've been using is evolving, right? What got you here would not get you to the next level. So it's important for us to continuously look at how we evolve some of our functions, like especially, risk management, for example. Gone are the days when you kind of, just tell, oh, these are the risks. Rather than that, tell them these are some of the steps that you could take to prevent some of these risks, right?
Right.
Yes, invest whatever little budget you have, invest them in small portions, at least in evolving technologies. Standardize, right? I mean, I still know of organizations whose policies and SOPs run into thousands, probably more than that as well, right? So there are multiple opportunities for us to evolve ourselves, standardize, reimagine some of these processes. So a short answer to your question is essentially adapting, collaborating, and evolving.
And what's the best way to achieve this? I love that acronym. And I'm asking that in the context of, I feel like anybody listening to this, they're going to resonate with that, right? Like, of course, adaptability is important. Of course, we have to collaborate to get the data in order to be more value add to the organization, in order to help, provide essentially better decision making to the company. Of course, we have to evolve. Okay, so I think people would easily, our industry would easily pay mental assent to that, and yet we're at this sort of inflection point. I feel. We're at this sort of an inflection point or this crossroads where the rate of change, the volatility in our economy, in our companies is higher than it's been in sort of recent history. We have new technology that is, changing all the time, right? Like AI is changing constantly. And we seem to have this continued sort of aversion to it, or this continued fear within our space about, in the United States, there was recently, this executive order about, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is not going to be, it's not going to be as big of a deal. That was kind of the message that our space learned. And so there's some dissonance is what I'm saying. There's sort of this mental assent to a lot of the principles and axioms that you just talked about. And yet it doesn't feel to me like our industry is sort of evolving fast enough. It doesn't feel like we're adapting fast enough. It doesn't feel like we're collaborating enough to be that value-added business person, so to speak, within the company. A lot of people are still complaining about being this sort of bumper sticker on the car instead of being integrated into the engine or being the headlights on the car, whatever analogy you want to use. So how do we, and I'm rambling a little bit here, but like, do you feel like your business background, your accounting background, where you're interacting with the business at sort of a much deeper sort of, it's not a conceptual level, like you're on the front lines, you're seeing how the debits and credits ultimately kind of combine into the financial performance of the organization. Do you think that that background gives you this different lens and this sort of different sort of forward push to drive this kind of change? And if so, how do we bridge that gap for somebody who doesn't have that kind of a background to collaborate more, to evolve faster, to adapt at a more effective rate?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the critical factors which has helped me, and I'm going to share my personal experience here, Nick, is about, how do we really leverage technology and automation? And I believe these two are at the heart of compliance and risk functions, right? So it's
Yeah.
important for us to really, we don't have to boil the ocean. We don't have a luxury of budgets. Absolutely. But really look at, for example, what I do is, I look at the digital transformation journey of the current organization that I'm part of and try to see how much of it can I leverage it versus reinventing it. Right. And as I said, in terms of collaboration, when I go to my HR function, I would want to tell them that, look, by this co-creation model or kind of bringing in all of the data that we have, I'm going to give you back value. And I can share a fantastic example from one of this, what I had undergone as part of this exercise, Nick. So there was this investigation that we were part of back then, where you had a sort of a collusion by multiple roles in the organization, as a result of which millions of dollars got siphoned off, and finally, a whistleblower blew up the case, and then when the investigation eventually happened, it was identified that just didn't happen overnight. There were enough red flags, there were enough indicators in multiple at multiple checkpoints, but which somehow got ignored. So as a result of which, we took up this exercise of bringing together three pieces of data sets, right? And I'm sure you can relate to this. First is the historical background verification of the employees, whoever have been part of the organization, right? The second piece of the data is their annual performance data, focusing on their behavioral aspects, right? Because typically performance has two elements. One is, of course, your deliverables. The two is the behavioral aspect. So we focused on the behavioral aspects of it, both structured and unstructured data. And thirdly, what we also picked up were the exit interview data of the employees of this organization. And
in general, or just those first two, were those just around the people that were part of this whole case, or was that everybody?
So basically, the first step was the specific, as part of the investigation, of course, it was part of those specific individuals who were identified. But eventually, we went back and worked to kind of map some of these data sets together. And guess what, and we leveraged the technology teams to actually, help us to kind of identify patterns from the background verification to the performance management to the exit interviews. And it would be unbelievable. It was unbelievable for me at that point that all of the outcomes of the investigation that we had actually identified had some sort of linkages back to the patterns that got revealed by looking at these data sets. For example, there were a bunch of people within that team who had exited prior to the incident being discovered. And 7 out of 10 of those who had exited actually called out some of these, siphoning of funds, etc., through the exit interview.
In the exit interview.
Sorry?
In the exit. That was called out in the exit interview.
Absolutely. And then, nobody bothered to look at that or act upon that, right? Because people thought, people are anyway exiting. It's okay. Maybe they're disgruntled. But that's an eye-opening case study in itself for me, where when you look at, probably on the prima facie side, they would look as independent data sets. But when you actually bring all of these together onto one platform and then try to map them, the output is phenomenal in terms of the insights that they provide. And this is just one example, right? I mean, look at the data that finance is sitting on, look at the data that HR, legal functions are sitting on.
Right.
I mean, honestly, if there is a way in which, we could actually collaborate as an organization to bring all of this, I think the functions of risk and compliance would actually demonstrate the value of really bringing back to the organization, telling them, look, these are your red flags. These are some of the patterns that we see are evolving. You better watch out, right?
Yeah, I love that example. It's such a great case study.
Yeah.
Risk and compliance has such a unique value potential in an organization. I call it the circulatory system of the organization. And when that circulatory system is healthy, it's touching these different parts and it's bringing all these little pieces of data together to recognize these kinds of patterns. The siloing of information is a massive challenge as an organization grows. That otherism, so to speak, where we kind of forget that we're all wearing the same jersey and we're on the same team. Our adversaries start to be other departments. There's there's little fiefdoms. There's these little walls that go up, and that makes it more difficult. But to your point, that risk intelligence is everywhere inside the organization. And I think it's on the risk and compliance team to gather that risk intelligence and pull that together into a cohesive story with a scientific approach to understand, is this a risk factor? And, you talked about exit interviews. Our company does exit interviews, and some of our clients do it all together. And I don't understand why every compliance team, for example, in addition to whatever speak up program they have, they don't have exit interviews going as well, because to your point, there's a ton of risk intelligence in those conversations. 7 out of 10 people called out or indicated that there was some kind of smoke for this thing that ended up being a massive fire. I mean, that was sitting in some file somewhere. That was sitting in some department somewhere. And to your point, no one did anything about it. Nobody put 2 and 2 together to see, like, oh my gosh, this might be an issue. And for a department, or for a department, risk and compliance, which is often viewed as a cost center, to me, it's just like so obvious. There's so much value in bringing these different pieces of information together and remixing it a little bit. And I'm puzzled why more people don't have the courage, let's say, or the impetus or the motivation to, do that ACE thing, really lean into that collaboration, really kind of evolve as the business evolves and manifest and demonstrate the value that we can provide.
Yep.
So that's a great case study. And I want to pivot a little bit into automation, because there's this thing going on, I think, broadly kind of across the world, where people are scared of the automation potential that can come from a lot of these new technologies. I don't know why they're actually scared. I have some suspicions. I think one reason might be, back when there were just horses, I think the guy in the town who made horseshoes probably was really scared of cars, because it actually, not that he was scared of cars, but that was a threat to his livelihood. I think the fear could be rooted in something like that. So how are you able to overcome that sort of base level fear and really lean into harnessing this new technology to do more with less, as you were saying before?
Right.
I'm trying to get down to like a mindset thing, because I think mindset kind of, you have a very curious mind, of course. You're very intelligent. Obviously, you're somebody who is able to and hungry for a challenge. That was demonstrated throughout your entire story. But for somebody who is not that way naturally, how can we help their mindset to maybe change a little bit to start embracing some of this stuff?
So to your previous point, Nick, I think there is, technology automation causing job losses is just not within the risk and compliance function, right? It's across the board. And I believe this is one of the biggest myths, because I remember many decades ago, as I said, when I chose to pursue at different points in my career, when I chose to pursue chartered accountancy as a profession, people said, it is technology, it is engineering, which is going to be the future. Why are you doing accounting or why are you doing auditing? Likewise, when I moved from a pure play quality assurance technology role back into audits, they said, why are you doing this? But I can tell you, I think it's technology is here to help us do our jobs better. I would say it's here to create millions of jobs rather than take away jobs. But having said that, I think there is a certain need for each one of us as professionals to reskill and upskill, right? And when I say that, I don't mean that you will have to be an AI expert. Rather, learn about what AI can do. Have those conversations. But what I sometimes, I mean, not sometimes, what I do diligently as part of my role as a risk and compliance professional, Nick, is that every quarter I go and meet up with my technology leaders. I try to read up what's the new technology that's coming my way. And I really have this conversation with them about what are my problem statements and how can their technology tools, platforms actually support us. And I want to share a very classic example with you. We had, like every other organization, a large number of policies and procedures within our system. So, in one of my previous conversations with the technology folks, I just brought this up and I said, look, we have tens of thousands of policies, right? And then when you go through them and you sift through them, you do realize that there are significant number of duplication because every entity has written its own policy, which is duplicated by the second entity with probably a 5% change. And this was about a year and a half ago when Gen AI was actually picking up pace. And then, one of these technology leaders proposed to me, why don't we use AI to actually solve this problem? So what we did just as a pilot was pick up about 20 policies which were similar. And then there was this tool which some of the technology folks were, sort of developing within our global capability center. So I gave them these 20 policies and I said, how can you help me streamline or rationalize them? They took about 2 weeks and then they came back to me with a proof of concept and they said, these 20 policies are clustered into 7 groups, each about 2-3 of them having similarities. And within each group, they applied an algorithm to identify what are the commonalities and what are the differences. And interestingly enough, merging those commonalities and identifying those differences in a single merged policy, right?
Wow.
Which means that imagine if you were to, extrapolate this to the policies which are running into tens of thousands, how simple it could get. Look at the reduction in administrative burden for the entire system in sort of creating those policies, maintaining them, and most importantly, compliance to them. I cannot imagine, organizations complying to tens and thousands of policies, right? So I think these are simple examples through conversations, through really understanding. And I'm not a Gen AI expert anyway, right? I just talk to my technology leaders, tell them, and then give them what they need, and they come up with the solution. So these are examples of really, reskilling or upskilling to me, where you don't have to really get a hang of it completely, be an expert, but just understand what it could offer and see how it could solve their problem.
So but there's a drive in you to do that. There's a drive in you to do that research, and there's a drive in you to schedule those things on a quarter by quarter basis. And there's a drive that you have to utilize this technology to solve this problem. That to me is like a true kind of drive for continuous improvement. Is that rooted in just how you're wired as a person, or has the experience you had in sort of general quality assurance and in business in general helped reinforce that kind of drive?
Certainly, Nick. And I would like to bring out the example of my experience when I played the role of a quality assurance engineer in one of the large technology corporations, right? And I had just gone in from an internal audit consulting firm. I mean, the shift was phenomenal in terms of multiple different aspects. And I was like overwhelmed, honestly, at the beginning. But then as I got myself familiarized into the function and the department, what I observed was, a few things, right, which I thought was really very important for us to, bring it back in a way to functions like risk and compliance. And I would probably think of three of them, right? The first and the most important one is really the unrelenting focus on the customer or the end user, right? The entire function, the technology functions, the quality assurance functions were always wired to look outwards, look what the customer needs, look how to ease the life of an end user, and then come back and make changes to your technology, your platform to ease their way. Right. And to me, that's a little bit of the functions of risk and compliance are a little bit of a laggard in some of these because we're always most likely looking inwards. Right. We
Right.
never think, how can my function actually go and benefit my business? We would rather say, oh, because of you not complying to my function, you're going to get into trouble and nobody's going to like that. Right.
Yep.
I would rather say this is how we're going to benefit out of it. And it's probably the same statement, but a different narrative. Right. So I think that was my first learning. Secondly, the continuous improvement mindset. I mean, we were always thinking about improving the version of the tool, right? Every 15 days, we used to have releases. And it would used to through patches, through new versions, through new releases, and each version would improve itself from the previous version. And if you look at it at the end of year one, to the version that we started at the beginning of the year, to the version at the end of the year, it is phenomenally different, right? And that's again another thing that I would like to bring it back to our functions because we write an SOP, we write a policy, we forget about it for the next 3 years until it comes up for revision, right? But look at the agility in the technology functions where they're always looking for improvement, right? Why can't we bring this back to our functions? And lastly, the evidence-based decision making, right? Historically, in functions like audits, and risk, right? We take a sample and then try to predict the behavior of the larger population using that sample. How about looking at the entire population, identifying those deviations and actually, looking at those vis-a-vis looking at a random sample? It's going to give you a lot more credibility when you go and present your insights. I think these three principles have, and then when I bring them back into the functions of risk and compliance, make a humongous difference to how we approach the function as it is.
That's great. And there's so much in what you said. We could write a whole book on those last three things that you just talked about. I think that mindset of continuous improvement, that mindset of iteration, that mindset of there's always opportunities to make small tweaks that can many times, and I'm sure you saw this in multiple roles, that a small tweak to an existing system can have an outsized impact on the output that system is generating. So just knowing that, and maybe having seen that in this different realm, technology, brings in a new mindset for continued optimization in whatever you're doing. But I really want to circle back to that first thing you talked about, which is that inward versus that outward focus. I think you're dead on. I think you're absolutely right. The number one thing we can do is be better servants. Like, there's so many opportunities that open up for you when you're a servant to the organization, regardless of your position. And when we can move away from this defensible position, which ultimately entails that and causes that we have that inward sort of self-preservation defensive posture, which doesn't allow us to engage with open eyes and open hands, so to speak, with the rest of the organization in the most effective way. When we can move beyond that, we start to see a lot of different opportunities. We start to get access to collaborate more. We start to see, new ways that a tweak to something that existing can help our organization, our department, and then ultimately our organization, evolve in a more meaningful way. So I love that kind of mentality. And I think as we step into this new era in ethics and compliance, my hope is that more conversations with people like you who are living out these kind of values or living out these kind of tenets on a day-to-day basis, I hope that can, infect everybody. Like, we all need to be infected with that kind of mindset and mentality because, like, we are only scratching the surface on the impact that a strong ethics and compliance function or industry can have on the broader, global economy.
Yep, certainly.
So as we get close to wrapping up here, I always love to end with this question. If you could go back in time and you could find a younger version of yourself, what is some advice you wish you could give her? What's a piece of advice you wish you had sooner that, man, if you had that, you'd be in a totally different place or your impact could have been multiplied?
Great question, Nick. And I think probably one thing that I would always tell myself is, take it easy. I mean, when you're into something, it's like it's all the time you're under pressure to do it, right? But when you're outside of it, when you look back, you would always sort of look at it probably differently. And then as a professional, to me, I think, changing the narrative from, what can go wrong. I was always, in the early years of my career, tell my leaders, you know what, if you do this, you're going to go to jail. Right? If I want to flip that, and I would say probably if I had that opportunity back then, I would say, here are ways how you could prevent them from going wrong, right? I mean, this change of narrative from what can go wrong to how can we prevent from going wrong, to me is something that I've learned today, but I wish I had done that probably 2 decades ago.
That's there's a little bit of nuance. And, at the surface, that advice doesn't make sense. But when you dive into it, it makes a lot of sense. And it's very transformative. Not to say what could go wrong, but how can we kind of make this go right? Or how can we prevent something from going wrong? The former sort of presupposes that thing going wrong is an inevitability. Whereas the latter knows that there's many different paths up the mountain and there's many different ways to kind of make something work. And I think, again, when we can do that, we can bring a lot more agility to the business. I think, man, I just love that. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. And where can people find you? Where can people learn some more about you?
I'm reachable over LinkedIn, and also, I can share my personal mail ID should somebody want to learn something more than always happy to share.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Ethics Experts. This is really a lot of fun. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Nick, for having me on your expert podcast.